This is Business Talk, your business, your success. Sponsored by Take Action Business Coaching. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and may not be the views of the staff, advertisers, and owners of the station. Advice given is not intended to replace that of your business advisor. Now, let's get down to talking about your business, your success. This is Business Talk.
Well, good afternoon, Peg. Here we go.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here again on this wonderful day, Pete.
It's a wonderful Ohio day. Now we're here, and we're talking about business. And if you're a manager in a big company, we can talk about that, too.
Right. So we're talking about business in all kinds of ways, whatever role you have.
Right.
I like if you're a team member, I want you to listen to it knowing what you need to be and do and to be a better team member. If you're a manager, we want you to listen to be a better manager. And if you're a business owner, same thing. So it applies all across the board.
There you go.
That's what we're doing. And we're going to come up with some ideas today.
And our topic today is company culture. Once again,
culture.
It's big. And one of the reasons is the economy is cranking along so well that we need to keep our people.
Right. And
we need to hang on to our best.
And at the end of the day, the culture of the company will keep or have your people leave.
Right.
It's either one.
That's what will determine.
Right.
And
we're on our companies that we coach. So Pete and I are coaches. We've been doing this now for 12 or 13 years.
Yeah, 14-ish.
It's 13, I guess, for me and 14 for you.
Right.
And we work with companies, and we work for them for a long period of time because we work in and out with different employees, helping them one-on-one, and in the end, helping the culture be what it's supposed to be and stay what it's supposed to do. And that way people stay.
And we help them on everything.
Right.
Whatever they need. Right.
So, but before that, Pete, we always do a segment on good news. So
we always do some good news, and I've got some good news. You're going to like this. I'm starting out with something fun. You'll like this, Alan. See the picture? Wrestling tests Saudi limits. American professional wrestling has long been a guilty pleasure for Saudis, especially for women who draw dirty looks in this ultra-conservative society. They're allowed now to go to wrestling matches.
The Saudi Arabian
It's the first time ever.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
They've got pictures of women in hijab, the formal gear.
Yes.
And they're at a wrestling match, and they're having a blast. They're laughing.
They're laughing and smiling.
Now, they were just able to drive not too long ago.
So they're going crazy over there in Saudi Arabia. They're just going
they're
going nuts.
Match.
That is
cool?
Wonderful. That is good news, Pete. What other good news?
That is great news. So inflation rises, hitting the Fed's 2% target. Now you think, is that good news? Well, it just means the economy is good, so inflation is picking up. And consumer spending could propel growth. Over 60% of our economy is related to our own personal spending as opposed to business and the government, so it has picked up. Personal consumption expenditures, a measure of household spending on everything from dishwasher to books, increased a seasonally adjusted 0.4% in March from the prior month, the Consumer Department said Monday. So things are cranking.
That's good news.
This is interesting because it's right out of Ohio. So cities offer cash to lure workers. And it's got this picture of a couple. Hamilton, Ohio, jobs at paper mills and safe manufacturers on the stretch of the Great Miami River mostly dried up in the early 2000s. Today, a spruced-up waterfront, loft apartments. All that's missing are workers. And they've started to pay people. Relocate to Hamilton, Ohio, and the city promises $5,000 to help pay back your student loans.
That's creative. I like that creative. I like that creative and innovative.
There's a huge article in here about how many jobs are
Now, what paper
open.
Was that in?
This is out of the Wall Street Journal.
So
Hamilton,
Ohio made it to the Wall Street Journal.
It sure did. In this new phase of the U.S. economy, one marked by a shortage of workers rather than a shortage of jobs, civic leaders in Hamilton and all elsewhere in the country, why not pay people to move here? And so they're same thing with Grant County, Indiana. You can get $5,000 toward buying a home.
I like that.
Settle in North Platte, Nebraska, and the Chamber of Commerce will hold a ceremony in your honor to present an even bigger check. So,
wow, isn't that interesting?
Isn't that
bonuses
cool?
for working,
for moving and taking a job.
I like that. There we go.
Great?
That's one way. Here we are starting out with why our topic is culture, and this is Peg and Pete with Business Talk. And it's funny that here we are talking even cities saying we need people.
Oh yeah,
it's like
they can't get people to move there.
It's good.
And the last thing, now we have more, but the good news just keeps coming.
I see. If you were to look at Pete's stack,
it's unreal.
You have a stack of articles.
There's so
is that
much
for
good
next
news.
week?
It is now. Yeah. Well, the last one, these three articles are all the same. Now, a while back, this is not very long ago, we had a jet engine explode in midair. Now, luckily, most planes now are designed to fly on one engine, fortunately.
Right.
And the plane made a safe landing.
Right.
But this article describes what happened, and we know a little bit. It was metal fatigue, and part of the engine broke into the side of the plane, and someone was killed.
Right. Which
is really bad. But what this one article describes is that the pilots, they've been trained, they've practiced, they performed a very quick descent to get it down to where people can breathe quickly, because within 60 seconds, everybody be passed out in the cabin from lack of oxygen.
It's
and nobody
funny.
thinks about it.
Nobody talked about those pilots. Does that article talk about the
pilots?
pilots?
Yeah, they talk about what they did and how quickly they did it. They did it exactly like they were trained, because they've trained it. They know how to do it. They've practiced it, and they just did it. They followed the procedure.
During stress. And, one of the things, Pete, and I know we're talking culture, is I want to speak to training, so Pete and I and my husband John and our client Mark, we all go out to breakfast. And it's interesting. I'm not going to use the name of the place where we go to breakfast, but they're going through waitresses like it's crazy, right? And so we get a different waitress about every 2 weeks. And it was interesting because today we had and the waitress was lovely. This was last week. And we were talking about how when she came to our table, how she didn't really, you could tell she wasn't trained. Like, we knew it more than she did. And she was doing the best she could with what she had.
Right.
But in not being trained, she gave us more product than she ever would have. She gave us more bread. We usually don't get that bread. She gave us too much. And it was funny because we don't spend the time on training. And look at how important it was with those pilots, even down to a restaurant where, you know what, if you're not training your people right.
Well, and if you have hundreds of locations, and if they're giving away 50% free stuff that gets thrown away, it's not good.
Right. Right. Spending, putting your attention and energy and focus on training, because we're seeing that because the economy is so good, that we're seeing that the good training is being skipped. We're throwing people into the fire, or we're not spending enough time on development.
Well, the other thing, and we're going to get into this in this article in a little bit about culture, is that if you do a good job bringing new employees in and training them well, they're more likely to stay just because you paid attention to them.
Right.
Because they recognize that you value them. Right. Rather than just throwing them in there and say, hey, handle it.
Well, I guess I went on a tangent over the training.
No, but that's
just
good.
those pilots being trained, it's just, the more and more we're going, we see companies during this environment, we're seeing them, oh, we can get rid of the development. Oh, we can get rid of the training. Oh, we don't have time for that. And
you look at things as an expense, a short-term expense rather than a long-term value. Right. And training is one of those things that's long-term value. And it said, when the left engine broke apart, it broke a window. It caused the cabin to lose pressure. They dropped from 32,500 feet to 10,000 feet in 8 minutes. And a lot of the passengers were uncomfortable, but they had to do it, because they only have 60 seconds for the passengers. They would have started passing out. Right. If they didn't get down there quickly.
Even though they had their oxygen masks.
Right.
Okay, that's good news.
Interesting.
That's good news.
But good training there,
so
guys.
So all those articles, they were all about that same topic?
All three of them, yeah. I just pulled them out. And one of them was focused on the metal fatigue. Another one was focused on the procedures they used. It was just interesting.
All good?
All good, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so, the company did well by training and developing their employees to the point where they did it automatically.
Yeah.
That's what you really want.
You should be
when
doing.
A crisis happens, you want to do it automatically.
So question here for you to think about. What is your training procedures, number one? What training procedures should you improve or create?
Or have in the first place.
Yes, or create.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be you doing this all the time. It can be somebody else. It can be, you can delegate it to somebody who really understands that. Mm-hmm. But training, that's a good exercise for us.
So some homework for you listeners out there in your department or your company. Make a table of contents of your training manual. Just write it down. And then over the next year, or maybe 2 if you have a big company, right? Mm-hmm. It might take you a while to get this done, is start knocking those training procedures off, or checklists even.
Right. And scheduling them.
Yep.
So that's good. I like your good news, Pete.
Yeah.
Okay, so for today, tell us a little bit about today's
Well, there's an
discussion.
article here, and this is from a newsletter that we get from the Wharton School, which is at the University of Pennsylvania, and they send out copies of interviews that they've done with people that write books and other business leaders. And this person was the chief talent officer at Netflix, and she wrote a book called Powerful. And it talks about building a strong corporate culture. And we're going to talk about all this. And it's funny, I went through this thing and started reading it. And, oh, my gosh, this is happening every day. All this stuff is happening every day with our clients.
Yes, I mean, so a lot of these books that we talk about, the reason we recommend them is because we see it. Like, we could write the book.
Yeah.
I mean, we could write the book as well.
You see it all day long. I mean, I'll give you it says one thing that they point out here is that this author believes that startups have a better chance of building the right teams and behaviors than older and larger generations, where typically unwanted rules and time-worn processes constrain innovation.
To learn more about today's topic, call 614-306-7922. Now, back to more business talk.
All right, we're talking today about company culture.
Company culture,
Yes.
and
I was telling Peg in Saudi, going back to Saudi Arabia, they just opened their first movie theaters in 30 years.
gosh, we're in America.
We take everything for granted.
I was just
this
about
is why
to say
I like
that.
this so much.
We
It's
take
like
things for granted. How grateful are we that we can go to a library and check out books and it doesn't
you
cost
do whatever
us anything?
you want, pretty much.
Yeah,
as
we
long
get
as you're
to-
not hurting anybody.
We can watch
right?
YouTube. When we are in Turkey, Pete and I travel all over the world, speaking.
Uh-huh.
And we had a presentation in Turkey, and I'm like, well, we'll just connect to YouTube for some of our videos. And
We'll
they're
get
like-
on the internet.
They said, oh, no.
No, you don't get
You don't get on the internet. No, you don't
They
get
were
on
like,
YouTube.
are you kidding? You can't get on the internet. Like,
We take a lot for granted. We should just be grateful for all the things we have.
that's right.
Oh,
we can
my
go
gosh.
see a movie if we want
We
to.
can. My goodness. Isn't that wonderful?
Okay. So we're talking today about company culture, and
Yeah.
this woman, Patty McCord, used to be the chief talent officer at Netflix, and she wrote a book called Powerful. And she's being interviewed by somebody from the Wharton School, and they talked about startups having a better chance of building the right teams and behaviors than older and larger organizations. So, and I think one of the things they're talking about is that we get these rituals and norms that may not even be written down that are part of your company culture that it's hard to change the direction of the ship once
Well,
it's going in
right.
a direction for a while.
And so Pete and I, we are, you can call it change management kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
You can talk about a coaching, a cultural shift. But the reality of it is that it is going to be easier, Pete, if you're starting from scratch because you get to set it.
Yeah, if it's you and one other person,
Exactly.
you can say, okay,
You can
Joe,
say,
what do you think?
This is what we're going to do, and we're going to build, and we're going to hire to this.
Right.
But when we see transition in leadership or transition, I'm thinking of a family-run company. We work with a lot of family-run companies, and there's a transition.
Yeah, more than half. I'd
Yeah.
say.
And then even corporations, you see that if a leader changes, then it can change the culture.
Yeah.
And I like how they, we read a lot, and how we define culture is really the relationships you have and the way you treat each other.
Yeah, and this is good because this interviewer asked her what she thought defined what is a company culture.
What did she say?
And she said, well, she's a cultural anthropologist, and the culture is defined by the stories people tell, or it's the way people operate when no one's looking.
I like
How do you
this
make
too.
decisions? It's the values you hold dear that you know your colleagues hold dear as well. It's the expectations of how people are going to behave.
That's it right there.
And what gets punished and what gets rewarded.
It's the accountability and the way people behave. It's what's allowed and what's promoted. I like that. So, and it's really about and I like the same language.
Every culture has a somewhat unique culture. In retail, for example, you can look at data on what your customers are doing all over the world in real time. Connectivity changes the way we look and think about our customers.
Right. So one of the things, so if you're in a company and you say, I want to change its culture, right?
I'd like to improve it, or there's
I'd
some
like to
things I don't
improve it.
like about my
Now,
current
first
culture.
of all, if you're a team member, you do have a voice. If you say, well, I'm not the leader, I'm not the manager, you do have a voice. But I want you to understand that the culture that you have or that's there, it might be okay with the owners or the management team. And if that's okay,
to
then
change.
No. It might be okay.
Oh, what's
meaning
going on
what's
might be
going on
okay.
might be
Right.
okay. And if
That's
that's
true.
the case, You have to ask the question, I would think. And then if that's the case, maybe that's not the right fit for you.
Yeah, if this is not going to change and I don't like it, I may need to go somewhere else.
Right.
Okay.
Because if you're a teammate that's in a culture that you don't like and you become a complainer, then you're the problem.
So one thing they did at Netflix, when she first got in there, they wrote down what their cultural elements were. They wrote it down.
They're current.
It sounds funny. Yeah, right.
Well,
how they wanted it to be, too.
Oh, that's
but
what we do.
But they decided to document it, which we like that.
Which
That's a
is
good
what
thing.
we do.
Or get the top leaders together and say, okay, what do we really want here?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly
and then
what we do.
what are we currently doing?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the difference? What's the gap?
So what Pete and I do when we coach is we actually ask that same question. So we'll ask the leaders, okay, where is it we want to be? And then we actually ask the team members what's going on. Because we can define the culture for you on an anonymous basis and say, okay, here's a report. Here's your culture. Here's what everybody is seeing, feeling, hearing. And then, Pete, I like it also when we ask the team members, well, what is it you want?
Right. What do you really want? How do you really want it to be?
Yeah.
And she says it wasn't just something that was carved into the lobby. It was something that employees could say, hey, I think we could say this better on slide 17. If it's this was a PowerPoint that they had. And if it was important to the team, they'd change it.
Listening.
Based on an employee. So listen to your employees. And the employees had an impact in how the culture changed in the organization.
Which is important because they're going to be the ones that are executing it.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? But it does come from the top down.
Yep.
We see that. Now, I want to talk about, Pete, I know we were talking about the article, but I think that this is a good time. There's another book that Pete and I are endorsing and love, and I love the name of the title.
That's the best part.
It's called The Road Less Stupid. And it's Keith Cunningham. And he is truly a brilliant guy and just a good guy overall. We've heard him speak.
And he's poking fun at himself when he's writing this book because he's made business mistakes, and he's very successful.
Well, and I think that's exactly it. I like what you just said is he calls it The Road Less Stupid because like his first chapter is called Dumb Tax. And he goes, how often, he goes, in business, let me tell you something really stupid to do. Trial and error. He said, because what happens is, what if you read something or listened to someone and brought in a coach or had somebody that stopped you from making the error?
Right.
Because in business, trial and error is expensive.
Well, in a lot of cases, it's not about how fast you grow. It's about avoiding stupid mistakes.
Right.
If you avoid the mistakes, you're going to grow.
Right, right.
Especially in this kind of economy.
And so we really endorse this book because frankly, it's everything. We could have written the book and it would have written very
stuff.
similar. It's everything that we see, we practice. And one of the things, Pete, that he says to do, so let's say you have a culture and we've said to do, we've had people do this, is let's say you want to shift your culture.
Right.
Like Netflix, I guess, apparently wanted to shift their culture.
Yeah.
One of the things that you must do is as a leader, you need to stand up in front of everyone and apologize.
If you've done something wrong.
If the culture isn't what you've wanted it to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you would have actually an apology of, you know what?
You mean take ownership.
Take ownership. Right. You know what? I've allowed this. In some cases, maybe I've promoted it and I haven't realized that I was wrong. I'm thinking of the one person, this was like 7 or 8 years ago. We had a female leader that did this. And got up and she said it and she actually started getting a little teary-eyed. And it was really great because one of the things in the apology, at least what we say, is to make sure that you ask for help. So you tell them what happened, you tell them where you are, and you tell them what you're going to do. You know what?
It was well received.
Yeah.
Well received.
It was well received.
Really was.
And they were like, we'll help you. And she goes, my tendencies are to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to have this kind of culture. And we ended up going through a process. And it was good. You could immediately see people being open. Now, I want to also say that when you do that, and I have another gentleman Pete, that we coached that did this, and he took ownership in his apology. He said, listen, I know one thing I'm doing is I'm not following through on what I say I'm going to do. And I know because of that,
good.
I've don't have trust. It's a lack of trust for you. So here's my promise. You will see me following through. You will see this, and this is how I'm going to do it. And he said specifically, and now I need your help because it's a new behavior. It's a new change. I might slip up sometimes, but I'm going to revisit it. And I understand if you don't want to trust me until you see it, and that's okay.
Cool.
And 2 years later, he's doing it. At first, it was bumpy. Trust me. But it is good. So that I like when you're talking about that article about looking at the shift, that you have to know that the leadership team, it's a mirror. Whatever you're seeing, it's a mirror.
This is Peg and Pete with Business Talk, and we're talking about culture change. And there's a book here called Powerful, written by Patty McCord, that we're talking about. And at Netflix, apparently, they had a huge layoff. They cut the size of the company dramatically.
Really?
And they ended up with very few people in the company, but they were very focused. They realized that when we had the right people with the right focus and the right deadlines, people operated pretty independently. There weren't a lot of bosses that were able to run around and manage people. They didn't have enough people. So it was about everybody being an adult. Isn't that interesting?
Well,
And it was about them knowing what they're doing. It's about having people who are passionate about the work and what needs to get done and just going and doing it.
And that makes it holding accountable so much easier.
People do it themselves.
Right. Because a lot of times in cultures, what we hear is a couple things. Either I'm working harder than my neighbor and she gets away with it. We have some of that. And like, why is that inconsistency? So I like that. That makes it really good.
Yeah. Interesting. They had to get rid of performance improvement plans.
They had
That's
to.
a dumb thing to do when you're performing. Okay.
Why'd they have to get rid of them?
She doesn't really say here. Yeah, they had to rethink whether or not to have an annual performance review. A lot of our companies are doing things less formal and more often.
90 days is what we're seeing.
Quicker the better.
Guys, I know that might
better.
seem, for you all listening, saying, oh my gosh, I have so many direct reports. It seems so much. I'm telling you. So let me tell you about where we are. Right now, millennials are in our workforce. We are not just millennials, really any generation that's in our workforce is now being programmed for immediate response. And like I say that, meaning you post something on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, you get immediate response, right?
True. Yeah. Right.
You want to buy something from Amazon.
It's addictive.
Yes. You get something from Amazon. When does it come? Right away.
Right away. Yeah.
So our speed for feedback and need for it is actually increased because we've been trained. So now apply that principle in the workplace. And how often and quickly are you giving feedback to your team members?
Right. If it's only every 12 months, that's a problem.
Right. I mean, think of the thumbs up and the good jobs or whatever that on social media. And
oh yeah, right.
we need to actually mirror that in a way. And it doesn't all have to be good jobs. It just has to be feedback of what's going on. So we are saying every 90 days to do a meeting of a review. And if you don't have a review system, your homework is to get one.
And the system could be, I've got 10 direct reports. Well, how often are you going out to lunch with these folks? Or having a cup of coffee with them outside the office?
Outside and talking about non-business things.
Non-business and also some business, but you can spend one-on-one time with each one of them.
Well, going back to that article, Pete, I think that she said that you had defined culture as relationships.
Yep.
So if culture is relationships and we're talking about building your culture, then how are you building your relationships? How are you building your team members together?
And what things do you value, and how well do you communicate those things to all your employees? And new employees in particular. And they talk about onboarding in this document, so we'll talk about that
maybe
too.
When we return.
Very important.
Let's talk about onboarding when we return, because that is something that's missed in most companies.
Could your business use some help? Call 614-306-7922 to schedule your coaching session. 614-306-7922. Now, here's more business talk.
So we're talking today about culture and building a great culture within your company and some of the things that other people have done. And this article, again, is from Patty McCord, who is the Chief Talent Officer in Netflix. I like that title. It's a good title, Chief Talent Officer.
I do
it's
like
not
that.
An HR
I
person.
like that. Yeah. Well, and you're about to go in. We're talking about culture, Pete and I, and we defined it. We did define what culture was. Now, if you've missed some of this radio show, go to our website, takeactionbusinesscoaching.com.
Right. Click on the 98.9 FM icon, and you'll see our past shows by topic.
Because we archive them all. But, at the beginning, Pete was talking about what culture is.
It's the stories people tell. It's the
Thank
way
you.
people operate when no one's looking. It's the values you hold dear that you know your colleagues do as well. And it's the expectations of how people are going to behave.
And I like expectations of how people are behave in relationships that you're creating.
And the last part of that about how people behave is what gets punished and what gets rewarded.
I like that because it's reinforced.
And if we're managers, owners, leaders, we have to take ownership for the culture that's going on around us. It's ours.
Right.
Right. And if we don't like it, it's up to us to change it.
Well, and here's what culture isn't, and here's I want to talk about some businesses that might get into trouble of thinking culture isn't just about having a ping pong table in your office.
Yeah, that's actually in one of these articles. They talk about that.
Yeah, it's not just about saying, oh, I'm going to have a bunch of
fun
stuff. Things. Now, should you possibly have some of that in your environment? Absolutely, if that's the environment you want.
It's necessary, but not sufficient.
Yes. And it's not just about that saying, well, look, I gave you a
ping pong table.
I had one
What else do you
company.
want?
I gave you a room for meditation. Isn't that enough? No, because it goes beyond that.
No,
It goes,
just go in there and fall asleep. So
Right. And culture is, if you have been noticing, is becoming at the forefront of almost everything because we're in a competitive environment right now.
Oh, you're going to lose your best people, not the ones that you'd really like to lose.
Right.
Your best ones are just going to take off.
Right.
If the culture stinks.
Exactly. If they see they see things are going on. So one of the things, Pete, right before the break, we said we were going to talk about was onboarding. Explain a little bit about onboarding.
So onboarding, you get a new employee that you've interviewed and checked out the references and all these things, and they have the right training and education, you believe anyway, and experience. And how do you treat them once you've made that sale? And you're really making a sale. You're telling them how great it is to work there. You're telling them how much you're going to pay them, all the bonuses they're going to get, and you get them on, and then immediately ignore them afterwards. I'm just being funny, but sometimes this happens.
It does.
Shoo, you're so exhausted, and you're so worried about getting this person, you get them on board, and then you ignore them.
And they are determining for you in that first 24, 48 hours whether they're going to stay.
Yeah, right.
And what happens is most of us in this economy are pretty darn busy. We're all busy. So what happens is our effort, our focus, our time is not being allocated to onboarding this person. Because guess what? I've got to do the next thing. I got to produce. I got to do, I'm on production, or I've got a meeting, or I've got a proposal. So one of the things we want you to do is making sure that you not only have a systematic way for your onboarding, but you're also spending time and have people in your company that are in charge of this so that it doesn't slip through the cracks. And so we're going to tell you about, there's this one company, and I'm just going to say it's Kohl's because it's such a good compliment. Kohl's retail store. I've heard, now I haven't seen this, but I've heard about it, that when you work for them, at least at their corporate office,
Yeah.
that they send out, before you even start, a packet, an onboarding packet that shows who the employees are that they're going to be working with, what are their interests, what is their background, getting them familiar with their environment before they even walk through the door so that they have a chance to understand what they're about to encounter.
Yeah, so in one way, what you're saying is they formalize the process. And really what Peg and I are talking about is simply not having you write a book about onboarding, but a simple checklist. And we've done this several times in the last year to help clients through this, is what are the key things that you would really love a brand new employee to be exposed to within the first month? Well, let's just write them down.
Right. Like we have one company that one of the things we wanted them to do is spend time in each department, which is a good onboarding process, and really to understand and grasp what happens in each department so that when they're about to step into their role, that they have empathy for everyone and understanding.
Yeah, and introduce them to people, key people in certain departments. Of course, some of this depends on the size of the company, but there might be certain people that eventually they're going to interact with, and they need to know who that person is.
Well, and we have another idea for onboarding is the buddy system. Making sure that when you come on board that and this isn't the manager that's the buddy, because the manager ends up getting pulled away. They're in meetings, et cetera, but who is their go-to person that's in their same department that is going to be inviting and educate?
And think about this, who's going to go out to lunch with that person? At least ask them if they'd like to go out to lunch the first week or so.
Right, because they're the new kid.
So they feel included.
Right, they're the new kid. What happens?
Right.
What happens in that?
They're going to sit at a table by themselves.
Exactly. I know this
We're going back to school.
I mean, it sounds funny going back to school, but it really is. we don't grow up really. We're just adults, in an office instead of a school. So what is your system? What is it?
So one of the things she mentions here is that the longer the legacy and the longer the history and the deeper the habits, the harder they are to change. And they talk about one of the hardest things at big companies, everything is global initiatives, and that it's not just large corporations that they understand they need to change, like banks and things like that. Their industry is changing. But how do we create teams? When they stumbled at Netflix, they shrunk rapidly for a while. They thought everything was going to work, and they've got to get clear about where you want to be and then make sure you communicate that to everybody, and context is important. One of the most important things people on your team to communicate to the rest of the company is the CFO. One of the things they did is they taught all the managers how to read a financial statement.
Now, I have to tell you, we have a client that actually did that Business 101 class for all of their
that's
company.
Awesome.
They did Business 101 where they taught that, because a lot of times the more educated your team members are, the better culture you're going to have, because they're going to get why you're doing the things you're doing. There's reason, there's understanding.
Wouldn't it be nice if every employee understood the impact of pricing or purchasing at a good rate?
Right.
And margin and fixed cost versus variable cost. Wouldn't that be kind of helpful?
Right. And why sometimes we take risks, and why it's important, because we want to make sure that we're diversifying. And sometimes in diversification, there might be a slight risk that we have to do that, but it's for sustainability long term. Like a lot of people don't know that. So I like that Business 101, Pete. That was a really good thing that
the other thing
client
they got into talking about here is bonuses, and she worked with this large company in a consulting role and talked about departmental goals, and they had a very complex bonus structure, and she convinced them to throw it all out. That it was
smart.
all the amount of time that they put into calculating, keeping track of, and rewarding people, and it was complex enough that there were some things that were working against each other.
Oh,
to just eliminate it. Just throw it out.
That. We say simple is good. By the time you do some activity, whatever it is, you should be within moments be able to calculate your bonus.
Right.
If it's going to take that long where we have to take a few minutes to write everything down, that's the wrong bonus structure.
So radical honesty. So they just talked about, and then she talked about, and you like this too, they talked about why she likes working with engineers so much.
Oh, I love working with engineers.
Their world is good or bad, right or wrong, black or white, 0 or 1.
Love engineers.
Anything else is suspect.
I love them because engineers, and we specialize in working with engineers because I love them so much. Of course, Pete is a recovering engineer. Yeah. You know what they do? They do what they say they're going to do. They do what they say they're going to do. I'm going to do point A, B, and Z.
Once you can see the process, then it's easy.
It's wonderful.
But I got to understand where we're going first. Oh, if I don't, I'm not doing it.
Well, I get that. I completely understand, of course. And you know what? They'll do it. They do. And as long as they know the value, you're going to see the best results from engineers because they will execute. I love that. That's funny. She says the same thing.
Yep.
And one of the things about culture too, Pete, that you've got to consider, and she said it before, and let's talk about that for a moment, is the way we behave and the way we treat each other, which is different than values. I mean, values is important, but we've always said this. Action Coach, this is Action Coach, who we've been training and a part of.
Right.
It's called rules of the game, how we treat each other.
It's critical,
and it needs to be defined, and then held accountable to, and it needs to be defined by the team.
That's the ideal way to do it.
And approved by the owner or the manager.
Of course.
I mean, obviously, but we have to get buy-in and then hold accountable. Boy, that segment went quick. We were just talking and talking and talking. Just snuck up.
That's what happens.
It did. But let's talk when we return about the rules of the game and what we see in companies.
How do we create them and how do you use them?
Right. And what are some of the rules that have been created and why in the past and what has worked, and then how we do it moving forward, because that's been a good thing, I think, in part.
So one of our rules is do what you say you will do.
Yeah, and we'll talk about more on the way back. I mean, after the break, of what other companies would say are the rules, and we get people in a room. We do this during our team alignment, which we encourage everybody to be doing this team alignment at least once a year. Yeah, at least once a year, maybe every 6 months.
With big departments, you may do some periodic things throughout the year.
To learn more about today's topic, call 614-306-7922. Now, back to more business talk.
We're talking today about culture and how we can create a great culture in your company.
Right, absolutely. And Pete and I have been doing culture shifts in companies for the last 13 years. And sometimes now we talked about what would be some of the rules, the games, and what is that? And we talk about it being the behavior, the way we treat each other.
Right.
Another question we get is, how long does this take, Pete? Does it take
To
about
change
a week?
a culture
Yeah, just
or to
maybe
create
a week,
the rules of the game?
A couple days? No, to
No,
change a
it
culture.
well, of course, if you have 5 people versus 500, it'll take a little longer to do the 500.
Now,
right?
we have been in companies.
However, if you get the leaders of the 500 in a room together and spend a half a day or a day with them, and then they go out and really work on it, it can happen very quickly. But they all have to be committed.
And here's what will happen when you're shifting your culture, and to these rules of the game that we're going to create, is some people might not like it, because guess what?
That's true.
You have now allowed whatever culture it is to be that way, and your team members might like it the way it was.
Right.
Now, we're going to shift it.
Right.
Then guess what happens? You may lose some team members.
You may lose some folks, and that's okay. And a lot of it is testing. Employees are testing to see whether the managers or you, the owner or the leader, are really committed to the change.
Yeah, like, really, are we doing this? They're like
Right.
kids. Think about it. They're kids testing the
Come
parents.
on, I'm not buckling that seatbelt.
Yeah, really? Are you going to really, I haven't been buckling my seatbelt all this time, and now you're going to do it? And you do have to. So let's get back to the rules of the game. So how do we start doing this? So one of them is the rules of the game.
Yeah, so you have a group of folks in your company that are in a room, and we're saying, okay, what are half a dozen things that you would like to make sure are in these rules of the game, and have them all write them down.
Right.
And then we talk about them and distill them down to hopefully 10 or less, but a simple set of rules that you're going to live by.
And so,
like, do what you say you will do.
Yeah,
or
so some of them is
treat each other with respect.
Okay, so go back.
Yeah.
Hold on to do what you say you're going to do. That has been a rule. So why would that have been brought up?
Well, because if you say, hey, I'm going to go do this, and then you don't do it, and you repeat that same activity over and over again, you're going to lose trust. People are going to not trust you. And breaking down trust within an organization creates problems, huge problems.
And what,
we don't get things done.
And what happens is, the reason that probably was brought up is because whenever you get everybody together and they're creating, you put them in groups and you're getting them together to create these, it's because maybe it's been prevalent. Maybe to the point where it's been an issue. Do what you say you're going to do has been an issue in the past.
Your culture didn't value that in the past.
Or you value it so much you want to make sure.
Or it valued something else.
Right.
And that was the only thing that was
important. That could have happened. Yeah, that could have happened. Another one, I like this one. It's going direct. So
if I've got a problem, I come and talk to Alan.
Right. Or I talk to the person who I have the problem with versus, so if I have a problem with Pete here on the air because I've noticed he's been reading old articles, and I go to Alan and I complain, Alan, Pete's reading old articles.
Not new ones.
Not new ones, and I don't like this. That's not, that happens.
It's not going direct.
Yes, that's not going direct. In organizations, we find that really, going back to your trust, Pete, it diminishes trust, and it really puts a lot of labor, poor stress on the relationship. So that might be a rule of a behavior that, hey, we're going to go direct. We're not going to talk about each other behind their back. No gossiping, basically.
Right.
No drama. That creates drama. What's another rule of the game that some of our companies have come up with that have been really big?
The gasoline versus water.
Okay.
If somebody's got a problem and starts complaining, are you going to throw gasoline on it? In other words, jump in there and start complaining with them? Or are you going to tell them, hey, let's go back to work?
Yeah, I like that one.
I've got stuff to do. I'll see you.
Oh, and that ties into another one. Pete and I and Michelle and Don, we work with a lot of medical practices as a area. And so with that, we were with one of them in a team, and we decided to call it the vomit. The no vomit rule, which is sort of like the gasoline water. Yeah. Where
so the phone rings and it's a customer who's irate or is nasty.
Right.
And when you're done with the conversation, you hang up, and then I go in and tell 5 other people how nasty this was, and they get all upset and start telling other people. So I've thrown up on them, and they'll go throw up on other people. So it spreads.
It spreads, and everybody
It's like
gets sick.
A virus, right?
It's like it gets sick. And whether that's a customer, whether it's an internal employee or a system, it creates a complaining, negative, oppressive kind of sick culture that we don't want to create. And that's really important. When you're looking at culture, it's to define it. So that's one of the ways that we're going to define it. And then looking at the gap of where it is and where it is now.
So we'd encourage you all to look at the culture in your company you have now and decide whether or not you really love it. If it's great, foster it, help it grow, make an onboarding checklist or have somebody do it so that new employees, we're absolutely sure they've been exposed to the things you really want them exposed to, the positive examples and stories. And then also create rules of the game.
Right. Right. And we do this now. Pete and I can come into your company to do a couple things. Number one, we can come in and do an assessment and do an interview with your team members to see what your culture is. And then we'll interview your leadership team equally and your team members of what should it be, as well as you. We can help you with the gap. It's sometimes difficult to really understand what's going on if you're the one asking the questions. Because we don't have any skin in the game, people will tend to be a little more honest because it's all anonymous, these conversations.
Right.
And it's interesting also, Pete, that when we have the conversations, just as important as it is to hear the feedback, you and I were talking about this, is sometimes it's more important for them to be heard, the team member.
Right. Yeah.
Like, hey, I care. Like
they
people
appreciate the fact that somebody's actually asking them what they think.
And that
just that is important.
You just had that the other day where somebody goes,
Oh,
I am so
3
impressed.
times.
Oh, did they?
Oh,
what
yeah.
did they say?
That just the fact that we were doing a survey was really a good sign to them.
It showed
just that we were doing
it showed that the company cared.
Right.
It's really, and we talk about that. That's why we say when we come in, we want to show that you as a owner, as a company, care.
Well, and then what happens is the information is collated, and we put the like things together, and then we, working with the management team, come up with an action plan. What are we going to do with this?
Yeah,
there's some things we want to make sure we protect and keep going, and then there's some things we want to improve on, and we need to communicate that to the entire team.
Right.
And if you do that well, it's a big positive.
It's understanding
Huge
the gap.
positive.
And this is Peg and Pete with Business Talk, and today's topic is company culture. And we're talking about some of the changing. And so, Pete, one thing we haven't talked about is what do you think about keeping the culture? How do you keep, you've got a great culture. How do you make sure you keep it?
Well, first of all, if you're the leader, you have to live it. You have to make your decisions that are in accordance with the culture.
Okay, I like that. Very good.
And you've got to do it visibly. And then if you have someone that is not doing that, you have to take ownership for that and talk to the person and correct it.
And we say don't let it go for a minute.
No,
not a minute.
Exactly.
Not a moment.
Right.
The other thing,
you got to be the parent, right?
You have to be the parent.
Unfortunately.
Because you get what you tolerate. And it's so funny because that's one of the things, Pete and I say all the time, you get what you tolerate. And then the book, The Road Less Stupid, I laugh when I say that, by Keith Cunningham. And he talks about business in general, not just about culture. Well, one of his chapters is called Culture is King. You get what you tolerate. And I was like, well, this is our language
that sounds
right
familiar,
here.
Doesn't it?
That's exactly what we say.
It's very true. So if you allow folks to yell at each other in the workplace, that's the kind of culture you have. And people are going to be mean. And usually that escalates.
And it's interesting.
It never gets better.
I want to talk about one company case study that we have. We have a company that we coach that is a really great culture, terrific culture. One of the top cultures that we've ever coached, that good. And they're growing. And so another thing we want to do in order to keep the company culture great is when you're hiring to make sure you're matching your culture.
Somebody that's going to fit.
Somebody who's
and
going
be
to
comfortable in those confines.
Correct.
Right.
And it was so interesting because they did hire someone, and this person acted out. They actually yelled. Mm-hmm. They yelled at someone.
Okay.
This company.
A new employee?
A new employee.
Okay.
And this company, you don't yell.
We don't do that. Yeah.
We don't yell. And it was really great because the manager at the time pulled him aside in a direct way, not in front of people, and said, listen, Sam, this isn't how we do things here. This, hurt this person's feelings. And, you screamed and just redirected and then taught why and didn't let it go. It happened that day. It was discussed that day.
Great.
And
they did it immediately.
I have no doubt that Sam will not do that again because he didn't know. Like,
He didn't know.
sometimes you're coming into a new culture, you don't know what is tolerated.
Well,
and
he
what
might have
isn't.
worked for 10 years at a place where that was normal.
Well, exactly. And or I say
At home.
Yeah, or at home.
Yeah. Or
Yes,
both.
Or both. Or encouraged that this is how we do things. We yell and we scream.
We don't yell at this radio station
No, we don't.
at all.
No, there's no reason to.
No.
Most people don't respond to yelling. I'm just saying that.
They don't.
I was at a sports event, and I think it was Lauren's soccer game. Yeah, it was Lauren's soccer game.
No.
And Lauren is in eighth
Sometimes
grade.
there's yelling at soccer games.
Well, the one coach on the other team, her coach does not do that. Her coach is wonderful. And they just won the championship last week, and I was happy for them because they're just a good team. And the team they were playing against, the coach was screaming and yelling at these, they're 14-year-olds.
What's his name? Don't say it.
Oh, I don't know his name. It was from another team. And I was like, and she, later I was talking to the coach, and she goes, yeah, that screaming, I've noticed that when you scream at girls that are young, it's just not going to turn out good. And she goes, I'm smart enough
Usually
to know
don't
that.
get the results you want.
Yeah, you
right?
gotta make sure you do that. So Pete, in wrapping up company culture, one thing we want to make sure is if you didn't listen to this show in its entirety, you can go to our website, takeactionbusinesscoaching.com, and then click on the 98.9 logo, which you'll see all our archive shows.
Right. And if you're interested, you can read Chapter 7 in The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And it talks about culture is king. You get what you tolerate.
And it's only a few pages,
Right.
honestly. And then they have another one.
He gets right to the point.
I like it. He has another chapter called The Apology, which we talked about earlier in our show, which is what you need to do if you're going to shift your culture is you first have to apologize to the
And
team.
if you'd like to talk to us about any of this, give us a call at 614-306-7922, and we'll help you out.
And what you want to do is just we'll set up a phone appointment
Right.
and talk for a few minutes and decide whether it makes sense to get together and talk one-on-one about where you are and where you want to be, because that's what coaching's all about, is getting you to where you want to be.
Perfect.
And make sure that you follow through on some of these action steps we told you in the show.
And listen in next Saturday at 1 o'clock.
This has been Business Talk, your business, your success. Sponsored by Take Action Business Coaching. The opinions expressed were those of the participants and may not be the views of the staff, advertisers, and owners of the station. Advice given was not intended to replace that of your business advisor. For more information about the topics discussed today, call 614-306-7922. 614-306-7922. Tune in next week at this time for more Business Talk, your business, your success.